Good day, everyone. Of course, I'm John Porstein, Director Emeritus of the USS Monitor Center here at the Mariners Museum and Park. And today we're going to learn about one of the most tragic points in American history, and that is Nat Turner's rebellion. This rebellion not only is indicative of the wrongs of slavery, it also sends a shockwave through America. It happens in 1831, and in many ways it can be considered the opening salvos of the American Civil War. Well, so how does this all begin? I have to tell you that this is a unique story because we're going to add three other African-American story to the Nat Turner tale so that we get a great reference of how does one strive to achieve their freedom during the antebellum era. So, number one, we're going to be focused on what's called Southampton County, and I don't know why my slides aren't working, but they're not, and they were, so sorry to say that, and I don't know what to do, but nevertheless, this all begins in Southampton County, Virginia. Southampton County is located west of the James River, the outer reaches of what's called Hampton Roads, Virginia, and it is established as a county in 1749. This is almost 100 years after slavery had begun in Virginia. And actually, we realize that 1619 at Old Point Comfort will be the arrival of the first African Americans at Old Point Comfort. It will actually, those people are not necessarily slaves. We're not sure. Indentured servants, servants for life, many things are cut about. However, immediately, almost immediately, those African Americans become a very key or African people of African descent, because those first 19 came from Angola in a slave ship that was captured by privateers and brought to Jamestown in August of 1619. So eventually we'll see the codification of slavery, John Punch in 1649, the John Castor trial, where Antonio Johnson, a person of African descent, will sue to maintain his control over John Castor, and the judge rules that Castor is a slave for life. Very quickly, we see the establishment of slave codes because then Virginia is actually labor reliant. Now, this is really a later photograph. First in Virginia is tobacco, then it becomes other types of crops. Eventually in Southampton County, the leading crop is going to be cotton. And so Southampton County has over 8,000 slaves, 7,000 people of European descent, and 1,700 people that are considered free Black or Native American. Now, what is wrong with slavery? Well, that is another lecture, but I have to tell you that the issue is forced labor, the fear that people would have at any time they could be punished. The sexual exploitation was always there in people's mind. And perhaps another key issue is the breakup of slave families, particularly in the 19th century. Once the United States ends the slave trade, then, and there's the boom in cotton in the Deep South. So what's going to happen is a need for people to be enslaved in the South. And so in the middle colonies like Virginia and Maryland, they will be selling their enslaved people down south. This is a typical slave market. So considering all these factors, it is not surprising that some people believe that slavery is totally wrong. There's a rising abolitionist movement in the North. And then, of course, there's going to be this person. And this person is, of course, Nat Turner. And Nat Turner was born in October of 1800. From the very beginning of his life, people felt that there was something mystic and unusual about him, that he himself said, I carried a burden about me, and I knew events that had happened long before my life began and long before it is today. So he considers himself a prophet. Now, actually, in 1822, he's going to be sold from the estate of Samuel Turner to a man known as Thomas More. Now, at this time, this is 1822, between here and 1828. Now, what's really unusual about Nat Turner is that he learns how to read and write. And not only does he know how to read and write, he also uses the Bible as his inspiration for everything. He actually begins saying he sees signs from heaven. He looks up in the cloud and sees dark clouds come over white clouds, obviously like a slave revolt would be. He walks through the cornfield. He sees specks of blood on the stalks of the corn. He also sees, as he walks through the wood, figures on the back of leaves fighting. He believes he has a divine intervention with God, and that he is a chosen person, not the chosen one, but the chosen person to actually put an end to chattel slavery. Now, Nat Turner is going to be influenced by many, many things. He is noted as what we call a prophet. In fact, he will be nicknamed Nat the Prophet oftentimes. He will actually, in 1828, he will baptize himself and also a very wicked white man, Etheridge T. Brantley. And actually, Brantley, who has spots on his skin and is terrible, in a few days, he is freed of all evil. People take notice. Now, all of a sudden, Thomas More dies. And so actually, Nat Turner will eventually move into the home of Joseph Travis, because the descendant of Joseph Travis, Putnam Moore's mother, marries Travis. And as a result of that, Nat is actually enslaved by Putnam Moore. Now, I have to tell you, there are all these signs and mysteries that come to many people, and unusual sightings, particularly in the 19th century, where science is not really controlling how we think, or not controlling, but guiding us to how we think about events throughout the world. So there happens to be, in 12 February 1831, a solar eclipse. And you can see in this picture that the eclipse only comes in certain areas. And you can see by the pointer that is where Nat Turner was, and saw this eclipse that lasted for an hour and 12 minutes. You can well imagine, to most people, the world is changing, doom is coming, and Nat Turner sees it as a sign from above. And he begins planning his insurrection. And I have to tell you, he has some very close people that also believe in Nat as a prophet, that Nat understands that slavery needs to end. And they include Hark, Henry, Nelson, and Sam. They will conspire with Nat Turner. Now, Nat Turner says, we're going to have this revolution on July 4th, 1831. However, the pressure upon Nat Turner will become so great that he actually will become very sick, and there's no revolution. Now, Nat Turner, however, on August 13th, as a result of a volcano eruption very far away, It will change the atmosphere of the sky. Actually, it's an atmospheric phenomenon during which the sun turned bluish green, and one of those heavy, humid days where everything is blurred and dulled, and yet the sun has this different look about it. Nat Turner says, that is my sign. And so he actually begins to plan his revolt. On 14 August, Nat Turner actually will go and will preach outside of Barnes Methodist Church. Inside preaching is Richard Whitehead, a Methodist minister. Nat is able to preach outside. A rumor had spread that if you wear red that day, that you are part or willing to take part in Nat Turner's plans. Well, I have to tell you, on August 21, 1831, Nat has called for everyone to meet him in a reptile-infested swamp off Cabin Pond Road. And there they will meet. I have to tell you, first arriving will be Hark, Henry, Nelson, Sam, and 2 recruits, Will and Jack. Now, I have to tell you, it's not till a couple hours later that Nat arrives. He comes through the camp. Now, these other men have brought a shoat or a baby pig. They have brought some sweet potatoes. They create a fire and a little bit of brandy, and they wait the prophet. Well, he will arrive, he passes through the camp, sits on a log, and broods for a little while. However, then he will stand up and say, it's now time for us to strike for freedom. And in doing so, we will take the weapons of our enemy and smite them and gain our freedom. This is like out of Exodus. So just remember, Nat reads the Old Testament with great fervor. And so this, like the Jews rising up against the Egyptians, that is the great movement of what Nat Turner is telling them to do. Now, I have to tell you, they will begin their march on about 9 o'clock that night. The first house they really pass is going to be this one. This is Giles Rees's farm and home. Now, it just so happens that Nat Turner's wife, Cherry, lives at that farm, and so they pass it without any action. Well, then about 10 p.m., they're going to arrive. This is the sword that Nat Turner is going to acquire during the revolt. I've actually touched it, and it is a fabulous artifact beyond all meaning. Well, they will go to the Travis house where Nat and Hark had been enslaved. They go there, they talk about knocking down the door. Instead, they get a ladder, climb in through the upstairs window. Nat Turner comes downstairs, unlocks the door, unbolts the door, basically, and they go upstairs and they go into the main bedroom, and Nat is asked to strike the first blow. He has a hatchet, and as he hits towards Travis, he will see the blade knock off. In other words, he misses. Travis wakes up and says something unrememberable. However, then Will, who's later known as Will the Executioner, will come in, and he will actually cleave Travis in two and his wife in bed, as well as they go down and kill Putnam Moore, the master or the enslaver of Nat Turner, as well as a young orphan apprentice. They then go into the yard because they've gathered some muskets and shotguns from the Travis household, and they will actually drill. Nat can read and write. He's read some manuals on drill, and so that they put themselves into being an army, as some people will call them. Then they begin marching down White Meadow Road, and just so happens that a little ways down, Nat says, "We did not kill the baby." And he says, "Nits make gnats." And so Henry goes back and dispatches this young child. In other words, Nat's plan is to kill all white enslavers, so that he wants to spread terror and fear amongst all the inhabitants. So basically, they will go to several houses. He gains recruits. They kill several people, like at, I would say, each one of these houses is just unbelievable. The carnage that comes, they will kill Elizabeth Turner at her home, and she's a neighbor to Mrs. Newsom, who and Natwell Peebles are all staying together. They are killed. Actually, Peebles somehow is going to survive, and they then split. The men on horseback ride towards Catherine Whitehead House. Now, I have to tell you, Catherine Whitehead House, Catherine Whitehead is a significant slave owner, 18 slaves, and she's an enslaver. Her son, that's right, Richard Whitehead, the preacher, is actually working that day in the field with his enslaved people. And all of a sudden, a whirl of dust, up arrives Nat Turner and his men on horseback. Will, the executioner, actually drops down, and he will begin axing Richard Whitehead. And Richard Whitehead says, "Yes, what are you doing? What do you want?" And all the other enslaved or now freed people will shout, "Kill him, kill him, kill him." And so basically, Richard is going to be killed. They go into the house. Will virtually beheads Mrs. Whitehouse. The children try to escape. Actually, this is where Nat Turner will kill his only victim, and she will be Martha Whitehead. And Martha Whitehead he has his sword, right? And he hacks at her with his sword, and the sword is dull. It's a ceremonial sword. So instead, he chases her down and kills her with a rail post. This is terrible. However, one of the daughters will survive, thanks to one of the enslaved people known as Old Hubbard. And, remember, there's a big question. Do I join Nat Turner and try to strike for freedom? Or do I find my situation not acceptable, but I'm not going to be punished further if I involve myself with this rebellion? I have to tell you, this is a map showing kind of how Nat Turner begins. You can sit up and see the Giles Reese house, and you can see how they move towards the Catherine White house. That's right before then, they split up. So Hal Harris will be killed. And actually, they will get to Richard Porter's house, which is right there on your map. I'm sorry, the print is so small. However, what's going to happen is they arrive at the Nathaniel Francis house. And there at the Nathaniel Francis house, they will, as they come into the yard, now Nathaniel Francis is gone because news has started to spread about, actually, one young black will say that the folks are killing the white folks. And Nathaniel Francis hears this. He then immediately goes because his sister is in the path of these insurrectionists. The mother goes down a different path, leaving at home Lavinia Francis, who's 8 months pregnant. Now, I have to tell you, it is Nat Turner. They kill these 2 young boys out in the field. They then will, of course, come into the house knowing Lavinia Francis is there. Actually, an enslaved person named Nelson will take her upstairs and hide her in a cubby. This is the Nathaniel Francis house. This is the cubby you see right behind the spinning wheel. And that is where Nelson will put Lavinia Francis. It's hot, this is August 1831, and he covers her with a bunch of baskets. And then will basically hide her when some of Nat Turner's followers come upstairs. Nelson says, well, she's not here. And they look out the window, and it's really terrible because Mrs. John K. Williams is coming down the lane leading to the Francis house, and with her child, and they say, there she is, and they go down and kill Mrs. Williams. And it's just really horrid in many, many ways. This scene right here is printed right after the rebellion occurs, and you can see number one is actually detailing the death of Mrs. Travis. Then you see number two, that's going to be supposedly Richard Whitehead. I don't think he dressed like that in the field, but nevertheless, you can see how they killed him. And then number three is an amazing story because Nat Turner and his men, now there's already warnings that the former enslaved individuals have risen up. This is the thing that so many enslavers and most people of European descent feared. If you notice, the census of 1830 puts more enslaved people than European descent people. So that was a general fear in so many places throughout the South. Now they happened to get to Captain John Barrow, is number three in this image. Now, he is a veteran of the War of 1812. He tells his wife to get out of there, and his wife is named Mary. She is the daughter of a woman named Rebecca Vaughan, who will come to play in just a little bit. And she is, she has to she says, I can't leave yet. I'm wearing the wrong dress. I got to get my makeup on. And so Barrow has to wait, and she somehow escapes. And I have to tell you that it will be literally a fight between Barrow and the insurrectionists. And in fact, Nat will later report in his confession that had they met someone like Barrow at the very beginning, the insurrection would have failed. But instead, he fights them off with pistol, shotgun, rifle, and finally his sword, till he's fought back to a window where they reach in and slit his throat. Because of his bravery, believe it or not, they will then drink his blood. They lay him out. Most of the victims are just left where they fall. However, Barrow is placed in a quilt with a plug of tobacco on his chest. So you can just see how fierce this rebellion is coming. And it is an aspect of Nat Turner's insurrection is going to be depicted in paint everywhere. And you can see the slave cabin and the plantation, which is a mythical view. Now around noon o'clock, Nat Turner has about 60 or more people with him, all riding horses, all with guns or swords or axes. And they also are now all wearing red sashes, whether they're curtains cut down or white linens rest in the blood of their victims. They're wearing some of the clothes of the people that they had killed, especially their former enslavers. So basically, they arrive here at the Rebecca Vaughan house. And the Rebecca Vaughan house, Rebecca Vaughan, one of the most beautiful women in the county. The daughter, Mary, was very vain. She has another daughter who will figure in the story. However, Rebecca is there preparing the trousseau for her niece, and her name is, of course, Anna Eliza Vaughan, called the most beautiful girl in the county. She's about ready to get married. And so, as Nat Turner's men come on, they come down the lane, they kill one of the sons, and their two sons, George and Arthur, and then they ride into the yard right in front of this view where you see this is such a commotion. They kill Arthur and the overseer, and then Rebecca Vaughan comes to the porch with all this commotion. And, or actually, she goes inside. When it first happens, Anna Eliza Vaughan comes down to that very front door, and she is shot and thrown out of the door. There is Rebecca Vaughan, and she says, please let me meet my maker with prayer. So they allow her to go upstairs, and they wait, and I guess she prayed too long, and so they went upstairs and killed her right at the landing upstairs in this house. Actually, I'm restoring this house right now, but nevertheless, now this is the last killing of enslavers. The number is up to 57, according to most accounts. And then Nat, the men are going to the still, and they drink some of the brandy and they spit it out. Damn stuff, they say. And Nat says, now Nat's been very passive, right? He's actually sitting on his horse looking at the body of Anna Eliza Vaughan. And then he says, on to Jerusalem, and out they go towards Jerusalem, which is today's Courtland, the county seat. En route there, they stop at the Parker Plantation. There, Nat will leave a guard at the gate, and they said, we're going to recruit many people there. Well, instead, many of his men get intoxicated over the brandy that's there. Nat Turner figures this all out. He's upset. He tries to re-rally his men because now the Southampton militia has mustered their 18 men, commanded by Captain Pete and Captain Brian. And so they appear. And so Nat sees this. He orders them to charge. The militia are thrown back. 6 of Nat's men are wounded, and as a result of that, they come to a rise. They see more militia, and they realize the news is out. So what's going to happen at Parker's Field is that Nat Turner loses about 40 of his followers by being intoxicated, by the shock of the militia, fleeing the area, but Nat's not ready to give up. He knows the main bridge into Jerusalem is going to be blocked. However, there's a second bridge called Cypress Bridge, and he will go there and actually we'll see militia. This is a view of militia arriving in Southampton County. And basically, they get to Cypress Bridge. They find it blocked. They then move back towards kind of parallel to where Jerusalem's located. They pass by John Thomas's house. John Thomas has died. His son, 13-year-old George Thomas, later that great Civil War general, will get his family, and they escape Nat Turner by going into the swamps because their carriage isn't fast enough. Well, what's going to happen next is Nat Turner takes his men. They're going to go to basically a place called Ridley's Quarters. And Ridley's Quarters is actually owned by a colonel, and the Ridley Quarters, Thomas Ridley has 145 slaves. And so the militia is camped really close. But Nat Turner's men try to stay there for the night. There's a commotion in the middle of the night, and Nat Turner now has just about 20 volunteers. The next morning at dawn, they decide to march on. And the big thing is, one house in the way is the home of Dr. Simon Blunt. And basically, Blunt has gone to his enslaved population and has said to them, I have treated you well, and there is this rebellion. If you want to go join it, leave now. I won't stop you. However, those that don't want to join it and those that believe in my goodness and have loyalty towards me will help me defeat these insurrectionists. And so what will happen is that Nat Turner and his followers will arrive at the gate, which is locked. Nat Turner says, nothing will stop us. And he breaks down the lock. Hart, one of his most important lieutenants, will ride up towards the front porch of the Blunt home. And as a result of that, at that moment, actually springing up into action will be Dr. Blunt, his son, and his overseer, with the daughters and mother loading muskets behind him. They send out a fusillage. Hark is critically wounded, and from the right side of the building is going to come Blunt's enslaved people, and they throw back Nat Turner. Nat Turner is shocked by this. He tries to rally his men at a place called Newt Harris's house. However, the militia has arrived. Because I want to tell you, they had sent out news of this rebellion very quickly. It is sent out to Petersburg, Richmond, and Norfolk by express riders. And so Governor John Floyd learns all about this. You could see the militia arriving. They call out militia in Richmond, Norfolk, Petersburg, Surrey County, Grenville County. It's like, oh my gosh. Even North Carolina counties like Northampton will muster their militias, and they come to put down the revolt. In fact, the mayor of Norfolk is so afeared of what's happening that this is from a Fayetteville Independent Light Infantry, but this is very typical as the North Carolina will appeared around 1830. So basically, the mayor of Norfolk calls out to the commander of Fort Monroe, Lieutenant Colonel William Worth, says, you got to do something to stop this. And then at the very same time, the mayor of Norfolk contacts the commandant of the Gosport Navy Yard, Commodore Lewis Warrington, and they get Blue Jackets Marines under the command of Stephen Elliott, as well as Lieutenant Colonel William House, and they will head out on the steamer Hampton to Suffolk and then march their way towards Southampton County. In the meantime, the militia has come and we're very pointed on trying to gain revenge. And it's hard to tell who was part of it, who was not. Actually, there was a scene at the Francis house that I sadly skipped over, because when Lavinia Francis wakes up and Nat Turner's men has gone away, she comes downstairs. Her enslaved kitchen helper, Charlotte, will come at Lavinia with a knife saying, I thought they got you. And Esther, who had been Lavinia's enslaved companion since a childhood, intercedes. You got to realize, once again, a decision-making point. So basically, the militia are very harsh in bringing together all these insurrectionists, create all sorts of horrors, just as bad as would have been done by Nat Turner and his followers. Actually, Brigadier General Richard Epps is going to have to tell his men to stand down. if you continue these harsh retributions, you will be court-martialed. And so it all kind of stops with the arrival of the U.S. Navy, U.S. Marines, and Army units. In the meantime, the leftover of what the militia had done, Charlotte had been caught and actually been tied to a tree, used as target practice. There's a place in Southampton County that was once known as Black Signpost Road, which is where they put a head of one of the insurrectionists or believed insurrectionists as a warning to all what happens when slaves revolt. Now, this is the governor of Virginia during this time, and I'll tell you, John Floyd is, number one, upset that they called out the U.S. military because he believes this is a Virginia issue. He also will make sure that the militia puts down this in an orderly fashion. That's what he tells William Broadnax, another brigadier general, as well as Richard Epps. And he says, we're going to try these people in the court of Oye Terminator. And so don't kill anymore. Let's bring them to trial. Now, there are a couple of reasons why Floyd did that. Number one, he wanted to appear to have a certain sense of legality and putting down this insurrection. And that's by taking people to court. He also knew that actually Virginia had a fund where they would reimburse slave owners if they had been, their enslaved person had been in doing something wrong and had been transported or so forth. And so basically what happens during each one of these trials, if you're found guilty, as many were, they will actually they will go through all these people they've captured. If you're found guilty, there are two choices. Number one, you would be executed. And this is a typical thing. There's a place in Courtland, Virginia today where what was called the hanging tree occurred. Right across the street from that is where the body of the burial place of the condemned is located. And so I'll get more to that. So the first person tried is going to actually be Tom, a enslaved person of Catherine Whitehead, is going to be found not guilty. However, as they go through the trials, many will be found guilty. However, the governor had the leave to actually commute the sentences so that many of the proven insurrectionists will have their sentence commuted. However, they will be sent down to be enslaved in the deep South. Many were actually hanged during this process. Now, I got to tell you, where's Nat Turner is the big question. And they actually put out a reward for him for $500. They actually bring, this is the Southampton jail in Jerusalem. And who records all this stuff? It's Clement Rochelle, who is actually, that's his home. And all the court records, which you can go see in Southampton County, are all written primarily by Clement Rochelle. So Nat Turner's rebellion has sparked this fear, and there are all these claims of possible enslaved people planning insurrections. So basically, no one knows what's happening because Nat Turner is disappeared. Nat Turner actually went out to where the event started, out on Cabin Pond Road, and hid in a cave. It's not really a cave. It is a fallen tree with fence rails thrown on top of it, and he actually will hide there from August 23rd until he will be captured on August excuse me, October 30th, 1831, by this man, Benjamin Phipps, who just kind of comes across him, and Nat Turner does not try to resist. This shows him with his sword, and basically this is another view of the capture of Nat Turner. And so Nat Turner is going to be taken to Southampton, or Jerusalem, Courtland today, and where he will be jailed, waiting trial. Now, one smart lawyer who lived in a house now known as Seven Gables, right next to the courthouse, his name is Thomas Ruffin Gray, will go in and take down Nat Turner's confession. This is one of the primary source documents we have about learning about what happened during the insurrection, because Nat Turner was there to tell the truth. Now, we don't know how Gray may have altered it, but still, we can picture this as the words of Nat Turner. And basically, he then goes to the court and with Nat Turner, when Nat Turner is going to be tried, and says, you know, Nat, is this your confession? And Nat Turner says, yes, it is. The court all agrees. So this is then going to be published, and actually sells tens of thousands of copies because it's a lurid event account of Nat Turner's rebellion. You know, Nat Turner will eventually be hanged on November 11th, 1831. He showed no emotion when he was hanged. Once he was cut down after dead, they do dissect his body. That's something that typically happened. His head will be chopped off, and a doctor from Norfolk will acquire it. That is that skull that's hanging around somewhere, we believe. And then he will have, you know, parts of his body cut off. He will be skinned. It's just terrible. And then he'll be buried at this place of the condemned. I can take you right where that is. So basically, what to do about Nat Turner? Well, if we go back to this man right here, John Floyd. John Floyd said, well, this is terrible. We have to put this to the test, because does Virginia want to live with the threat of enslaved people uprisings? And so this is something that will be actually brought to forth by, now, John Floyd at first wanted to end slavery in Virginia. He's visited by Thomas Calhoun, the great secessionist from South Carolina. And so Floyd instructions General Assembly was not clear about what to do. Nevertheless, John Randolph of Roanoke will put together a plan where they do what's called post-nati, eventual gradual ending of slavery. When if you're born, you turn 21, you'll become automatically free. So it's eventual. Actually, many in western counties, like in West Virginia and so forth, they would free the slaves right away. This has great debate. The Tidewater planters don't know how they can operate their farms without those enslaved people. So this vote in the 1832 General Assembly session will come to a vote and come to within 2 votes of being passed. Now, the big thing within this plan was that John Floyd, who blamed this whole insurrection on Northern abolitionists and free Black preachers. Now, remember, Nat Turner is a preacher who traveled about preaching, you know, how slavery was unjust, as we know it is, so, or was. And so what he wants to do with this law, if it passed, they would actually transport all the slaves from Virginia elsewhere. They didn't say exactly where, but they would, because John Floyd thought free blacks within the community are actually not good. And in fact, there's several free blacks who actually are part of this rebellion scenario. One of them, Barry Newsome's, who some claim to be white or a mulatto, will actually be taken to Richmond and tried and then hanged. It is really amazing what happens in the aftermath. But I have to tell you, this story is so relevant and really is all relevant about the 30 years before the Civil War, because Nat Turner took the violent approach to try and end slavery, which had to be done before the 1811 German Coast Rebellion, the Stonehoe Rebellion in the 18th century. However, others chose other paths. This man, of course, was also born in Southampton County, 10 miles from where Nat Turner was born, and actually only a couple of years before Nat Turner. He is, of course, Dred Scott. And as we know, Dred Scott will try to take the legal approach to find his freedom. This results in the Supreme Court declaring that Dred Scott is a slave because he has no rights under the Constitution to actually file a complaint. He is, after all, 3/5 a person according to the Constitution, and which is a very horrid concept to think of. Nat Turner took this effort and it became a national spectacle because of trying to recognize the evils of slavery, how some believed it was an economic vitality that allowed the export of important materials. I have to tell you that more and more people are becoming abolitionists as a result of what Nat Turner did, as a result about Dred Scott. However, there's more. If you can't try to take the court, have a court case, if you can't set up a mass uprising, you can do like this man did. And this man is John Brown. And he was originally born 10 years after Nat Turner, 10 miles away from where Nat Turner was born, and his name was originally Fed. Fed was enslaved on Mrs. Betty Moore's farm. When she died, his family would be broken up, and at age 10, he will be sold into being enslaved into the deep South in Georgia. And his slave owner is probably atypical of the bad type of slave owner. John Brown, has he changed his name too, no relation to John Brown of Patawatomie Creek. He will actually recount how terrible his life was every day. Mr. Stevens would hit him with a switch. In fact, Fed did not like that, so what? He'd keep running away. Finally, they would put the horn and bell on Fed, and you can just see how horrid this is. And can you run away? No. However, there's an incident where Stephen's son orders Fed to go get something out of the smokehouse. Fed says, "Oh my gosh, I can't do this with this thing on me." So it's taken off. What does Fed do? He runs away. He gets all the way to Louisiana, where he turns himself in under a new name, Benford, and actually will be sold into slavery on a plantation on the Mississippi River. And from there, he will escape. He will find his way on the Underground Railway, and he will make it all the way to Canada. He will actually attend the Dawn Institute, established by John Henson, another runaway enslaved person who found his freedom in Canada and set up what's called the Dawn Institute to train former enslaved people with a better, if you're a field enslaved person, you have very limited skills. So Henson wanted to give these people skills so they could have a self-reliant life. John Brown, with the passage of the 1850 Fugitive Slave Law, will decide to go to England. There, he will meet with the British and foreign anti-slavery society. He tells his story. This story is one of about 20 books that were written prior to the Civil War that brought attention to the evils of slavery. I hope many of you all seen 10 Years a Slave, but the same type of book with the same type of impact, just like Frederick Douglass's book, Am I Not a Man, they would say. Well, the story continues because yet another African-American, born 10 years apart from Nat Turner, 10 miles away from Nat Turner, is this man, Anthony William Gardner. Gardner is born a free Black. However, free Blacks suffered almost as badly as those who were enslaved. They had to pay a tax. It was just terrible. So they actually had an organization known as the American Colonization Society. And their goal was to purchase the freedom of slaves, pay for them to go back to Africa. They set up a colony there known as Liberia. Anthony Gardner goes there. He will actually read the law. In 1848, Liberia has its Declaration of Independence, written by this man, Anthony Gardner, who later becomes the 8th president of Liberia. So the story, Southampton must have had something in its water, because we see the 4 main ways to try to escape being enslaved: a violent uprising, taking the legal approach, actually going back to Africa, running away, and finding freedom out of the United States. And so all these efforts of all these people will bring us towards the Civil War. And this is, of course, a Medal of Honor recipient, Christian Fleetwood. And I use this slide to show how that people of African descent shook off the bonds of being enslaved and fought for their own freedom. I'm going to give a program next month about the Battle of Newmarket Heights, where this man received the Medal of Honor. So what have we learned today? Well, I have to tell you, we have learned that there are many ways to gain freedom. Nat Turner sent shockwaves throughout the world. His story appeared in Moscow newspaper, in Honolulu newspaper, all recognizing the fear of a slave revolt and cause, once they did not decide to free slaves, enslaved people in Virginia, they then will enact harsh slave codes. No more reading the writing. I had to have pass to be off your plantation, and so forth. Slavery took on a more evil approach, which led, of course, to our nation falling asunder in 1861. So that's my story. I'm actually restoring a house I call the Rebecca Vaughan House in Courtland right now. That is part of a trail I'm creating known as Nat Turner's Trail, where I'll take you to 40 different sites via interpretive signs as well as smartphone app. So it's pretty fast. It's not done yet, but anyway, that's the story of Nat Turner. Any questions?
Yes, John, of course we have questions. There definitely must be something in the water for that county that is very rural and remote even today to have had all this happen. Fascinating fascinating time. But Alan asked, how did Turner learn to read and write?
He learned to read and write because many young slaves would grow up with young owners, and that in some cases, like Benjamin Turner, allowed Nat, because he had this intellectual brightness about him, to go ahead and learn to read and write with his sons. And so that's how he learned to read and write.
How is there documentation that they really drank the blood of the fallen?
Yes, and it's in Nat Turner, the Confessions of Nat Turner, as transcribed by Thomas Ruffin Gray. So I take that.
I'm sorry.
I take that to be a pretty powerful document when it comes to looking at Nat Turner. There's another man who's in Southampton County at the time. He's a newspaper man, editor of the Richmond Whig, known as John Hampton Pleasance, and he writes about all the what you see when you arrive, and also the violent retributions. We believe those violent retributions resulted in about 40 to 50 deaths. There have been larger numbers proclaimed, but there's this one man, Patrick Breen, a friend of mine, professor, who did look through the tax records, and that's how he could tell how many were killed by the militia and how many enslavers were reimbursed by the Commonwealth of Virginia because their enslaved person had been either transported or hanged.
I don't think we know that any of these individuals who were killed were raped. I don't recall ever seeing anything about that. Do you, John?
No, I did not. In fact, basically, there's just this sense of retribution. So I don't want to rape someone who attempted to kill my my wife, right? That, you know, I want, they must be punished. And actually, I know the descendant of Nathaniel and Lavinia Francis, Rick Francis, who's the clerk of court in Southampton County. I also know a descendant of Nat Turner. He had 4 children, we believe, all there on Giles Reese's farm. And so, and it's amazing to meet some of these people.
Barry asked, why did the General Assembly prove reluctant to abolish slavery or approve gradual emancipation in the wake of this event?
Well, it was the, I think John Floyd does not give strong enough instructions to the General Assembly of what should be done. He had spoken about it. He had written about it. I've read his diary. I've read all his letters about this topic. I mean, there's a treasure trove of material out there about Nat Turner. And so, in essence, because he doesn't take a strong stance, because actually Tidewater and the Piedmont outnumbers the mountainous regions of Virginia at that time, they still were growing cotton, tobacco, and other goods. They also are profiting from the interstate slave trade. And so that's how that vote went down. And also what to do with them. And of course, John Randolph of Roanoke said, well, they should be freed and sent somewhere, but could not stay in Virginia. That was one of the big issues that caused this different approach, and the failure of that to pass was because those Virginians, those enslavers, if you had a person of African descent lived in your community, you did not want them there. And that's, bigotry at the highest level. And that was commonplace in Virginia at this time. By reading John Floyd, you really get the sense that he's trying to take a more egalitarian approach. He's trying to take an approach where we're going to try people, who participated in this and so forth. So I don't think he had the opportunity to make this happen, which would have changed everything, because Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky are all considering these very same laws in ending slavery in the 3 decades leading up to the Civil War.
John, comment, if you will. Nat Turner's certainly been part of the modern culture, if you will, of William Styron, that wrote the Confessions of Nat Turner. You mentioned 10 Years a Slave, the movie, and then there was the recent movie, Nat Turner's Rebellion. The subject is definitely still in the forefront. Can you comment on William Styron, since he is a fellow peninsula dweller?
Yes, and I knew him rather well, and he did very little research, and basically knew the basics of the story. He's incorrect in saying that Nat Turner, actually had a homosexual affair. He's incorrect in saying that he was in love with Catherine Whitehead. Those are all make-believe to make the story great. And so there's a small line of fact in Confessions of Nat Turner, but it should not be relied on as a historical resource, because it just didn't happen that way. And there's enough documentary evidence, overwhelmed with newspapers' accounts, the trial records themselves, which are shocking, and all remain in Courtland, Virginia today. Governor Floyd's letters are all in the Library of Virginia. There was a man known as John Drury who wrote a book in the 1890s where all these scene photographs came from, which can be found at the University of Virginia. So there's a tremendous amount of resource. So when it comes in, William Styron, who's a great writer, could tell a great story, but it's fiction, not fact. This film that came out recently, now I have to tell you, 10 Years a Slave was highly accurate. There is no doubt whatsoever that you see 3 different conditions of slavery. And one is with a benevolent slave owner. However, bigotry by the overseers against this illiterate enslaved person, falsely enslaved person, will cause him to be, sold. And so the second owner is very harsh, wild, and crazy. He's terrible. And then he's rented to a mediocre guy who just wants them to work. However, he goes back to this very evil person. And so you see the horrors of slavery at any time. No matter how nice your master was, you were under threat of sexual exploitation, threat of injury, threat of overworth. It was, I can't say how terrible it was. And it's 12 Years a Slave, excuse me. And that is a viable story to read, as is John Brown or Fed's story that he gives. Now, I have to tell you, the film, Nat Turner, is like so wrong, I can't tell you. They filmed it, and now I've been to every one of these sites associated with Nat Turner, and there are no brick buildings other than the courthouse in Southampton County of any major report. I have to tell you, it's on the outskirts of Hampton roads, and its waters go into the North Carolina Sound. So it has some economic issues. So I have to say that that's a false narrative, and it should not be believed, no more than Bill Styron's book should be believed. however, 12 Years a Slave, a narrative of a slave's life in Georgia, so on, should be believed and should be recognized as the truth being told to people about these evils that existed. Yes, it was an economic system, but it was an evil economic system, which could have been done with free labor, in essence. So, what can I say? I think I'm writing a book right now about Nat Turner, almost done. And once again, I'm doing this Nat Turner trail. So, I feel very strongly that Nat Turner had every reason to try and rise and revolt. Dred Scott had every reason to try to find freedom through the courts. John Brown had every right to run away to find freedom in Canada and eventually in Great Britain. And of course, Anthony Gardner had every right to find freedom by going back to Africa at Liberia. And many of those descendants ruled Liberia until the great uprisings in Liberia of the 1970s. So it was reverse prejudice, I would have to say, but it's a powerful story. Okay.
Janelle is asking, were plantations burned during the insurrection?
No, they were not. Some were looted, and Nat Turner frowned upon that because they were there to punish the enslavers, not to destroy their homes, not to destroy the homes of those people they enslaved. So no, it was, what was horrid is that, as John Hampton Pleasant says in the Richmond Whig, that actually the bodies laid where they were. Already by the time we got there, vultures and crows were flying around. And it just so happens that one person was chastised, the owner of what's called Vaughan's Tavern, Henry Vaughan, believe it or not, father Anna Eliza Vaughan, brother-in-law to Rebecca Vaughan, and that he was supposedly chided for profiting over the bones of his kindred, according to the Niles Register. I'm not sure that is all true, but nevertheless, yes, it was. There was no mass destruction of property.
Well, we're going to end on a nice note of a different sort of bird other than a vulture. Terrence, a regular viewer, is commenting on your decoys, and he's asking about my favorite one of yours, the one over your left shoulder.
Yes.
If you'd tell us just a bit, it is not a curlew, it's a rail, is that right?
That's right. It's a rail, and it is made by Ira Hudson of Chincoteague. Kind of rare, I don't know. It's
she's a beauty.
She is a beauty. I think I have other favorite decoys. So that's in my top 10, maybe. I have hundreds upon hundreds of decoys because I've collected them my whole life and written extensively about decoys. So I'm glad you noticed, because it is an awesome bird.
Yes, she is. And we will close.
It's actually Julie, it's actually a male, but I know you call her she.
Well, I named her Raylene, so she's Raylene.
Okay, thank you.
But we hope you'll join us next Friday. We're back to the Civil War next Friday with the capture of Hatteras Inlet. If I was going to be captured anywhere in the world, Hatteras Inlet would be my #1 spot. So please join us next Friday at noon. And we invite you to share this program on our YouTube channel. As Tim said earlier, it will be posted in about a week. So thank you, John, for yet another stimulating and unbelievably informative lecture about a god-awful time of history, but we are glad to learn more about it. And we thank you all for being here and supporting the museum. Come back soon. Thank you.
Thank you.